Hello, and welcome to the first ever episode of Muy Criollo filmed at night. Definitely done for variety's sake, and not because I'm cramming the filming time for this episode between writing term papers. Definitely not that. Tonight, during this special, intimate episode of Muy Criollo, I won't be demonstrating any iconic national plates. No, this time I want to show you an old-fashioned treat you can only find in a few cafes and bakeries in Quito. Chimborazos. Less well known than a certain other pastry that occupies the same niche, Chimborazos are, well, I guess you could compare them to a cupcake. And on top, they're frosted with a cap of snow-white meringue, giving them the resemblance of their namesake, Chimborazo, the tallest mountain in Ecuador. These cakes are kind of difficult to make if you're not a very experienced baker, which, despite my dabbling, I am not. But there's no special unique technique besides baking skills you would already be using for other applications. To see what I mean, we'll have to travel back in time. I remember it like it was earlier today, because it was. So first, let's lay out our ingredients. And do get a scale if you have one. Baking a cake requires a bit more precision than what we've been doing so far. Here I've measured out 225 grams of all-purpose flour, 165 grams of sugar, 3 eggs beaten, 165 grams of butter, which I chopped up so it would soften faster, 1/3 cup of lemon juice, about 1.5 tablespoons of lemon zest, 1/3 cup of milk, and some salt and baking powder, from which I'll just be taking about 1.5 teaspoons. Now, let's start mixing. If you don't have a stand mixer, you can do this by hand with a rubber spatula, but it's going to be a lot easier with one. First, we have to cream the butter with the sugar. Mix that on medium speed with the paddle attachment. We're trying to get a smooth paste where all the sugar granules have dissolved. It'll take a few minutes, and the butter has a tendency to get stuck in the paddle, so stop it often to scrape down the paddle and the sides of the bowl. You'll notice that the butter-sugar mixture becomes lighter and fluffier as it mixes. Finally, when you touch it and you feel that the sugar has dissolved into the butter, you're now ready to gradually add in the eggs. Now, go slowly and let each little bit of beaten egg mix in thoroughly with the butter before adding more. You don't want it to break, or you'll end up with flat cupcakes. You can see here that even though I'm going at a slow pace, my batter does start to get very close to breaking. Once all your eggs have been added, stream in the lemon juice and add in the flour, a little at a time. After you've added about half the flour, you can add in the milk slowly as well. Then add the rest of the flour slowly, along with the lemon zest. Finally, add the salt and the baking powder. Give everything a good scraping to make sure it all gets incorporated evenly. Give it one last mix, and your batter is ready to bake. This is a decent batter. It definitely started to break a little, but it smoothed out in the end. We can work with this. Now, if you do a lot of baking, you might have a pastry bag lying around, but if you don't, you can use a Ziploc bag for this and cut off the tip at the bottom. Whatever you use, a good trick is to use a drinking glass to stand it up while you place the batter inside. Now we can place this in our molds. I greased these cupcake molds earlier with some vegetable oil, and now I'm filling them almost to the top with batter. The pastry bag allows me to pour the batter into a somewhat circular shape, which will help keep the cakes uniform. By pouring them in like this, it also helps prevent them from being flat. Now, strictly speaking, these are going to be a bit smaller than traditional Chimborazos, but I am unfortunately limited by my equipment. This one at the end is going to be a little small. Into a 350-degree oven they go for 20 minutes. And out they come. Once they've cooled down a little bit, pop them out of the molds and onto a plate. Now you can see we did have a little flattening at the tops and some small cracks. That's because my batter did break a little bit, but the damage is minor. These will be just fine. The small flaws will be well hidden by the meringue topping, which we'll make now. Returning to our stand mixer, we'll pour in 100 grams of egg whites and start beating those. Now, we'll be making Italian meringue, which is the most stable of meringues. So it's perfect for the topping of our Chimborazos, since it is both safe to eat and won't separate. What that means is we're cooking an equal amount of sugar with 30 grams of water in a pan to the softball stage. But wait, you say, you don't have a candy thermometer? How will you tell when we reach softball temperature? But wait, you don't even know what softball is? Isn't that a sport for children? Well, softball refers to the texture of the sugar when it reaches a certain temperature. At 235 degrees, after cooling, sugar will form a pliable, soft ball between your fingers. And that will be the key to checking when the sugar is ready. Set up a bowl of ice water next to the stove, and periodically take a bit of the sugar in a spoon and cool it in the water. Keep the flame low so the window of opportunity is longer for the desired temperature. Right now, our sugar only makes thin threads. It doesn't hold its shape at all. Definitely needs to cook more. Let's try again. Now the sugar has cooled into a pliable ball. We've reached softball. Turn off the flame and stop the cooking by dipping the bottom of the pot into the ice water. But don't let it sit there too much because it's time to return to our egg whites. Gently stream in the hot sugar. Try and get it all in, but be fast because once most of the liquid sugar has been poured out, what's left will quickly crystallize back into solid sugar. Once that starts to happen, leave it because it won't be worth adding. Hopefully, you moved fast enough to get almost all the sugar incorporated in the meringue without making the opposite mistake of cooking your egg whites by pouring it in too fast. If you did this right, you should start to see your egg whites change color, becoming very white and much fluffier. The hot syrup has heated up the whole mix, making it safe to eat, and stabilized our meringue so it can incorporate much more air. Now continue to beat the egg whites, checking for stiff peaks. We've reached soft peaks here. Now we've reached stiff peaks, but notice they're not too stiff. The meringue still has some flexibility, and that's important because if it becomes too stiff, it loses all flexibility and will just break when we try to put it on our Chimborazos. We're going to frost our Chimborazos immediately before that meringue dries out and starts to lose that flexibility we need. Now, you could put this in a piping bag, but the easiest way to get the proper shape of the Chimborazo topping is to just dip the cake in there and lift out some meringue on the top, using a spatula to help spread it evenly around the top and bring it to a peak in the middle, just like this. Don't worry if it doesn't look perfect, it's supposed to be somewhat irregular, just like how a mountain's peak is not perfectly straight, but kind of craggly. These are just mini versions of that. It takes a little practice to get the twist of the wrist just right, but after the third or fourth one, you'll start to get the hang of it. And if you're not satisfied with the topping, use the spatula and heap some more on. Now that they've all been iced, or maybe I should say capped, you can go through them and clean up the bottoms and edges with a paper towel so that they're more presentable and less sticky. And there you have it, delicious Chimborazos. They're ready to eat like this, but if you want to save them for later, you're going to want to cover the meringue in plastic wrap, pressed right down onto its surface so that it doesn't dry out and shrink. Like this, you could take a tray of them to your next party, or something like that when we can all go outside again. As for me, this is dessert for the week. Again, they're not typically this small, but honestly, I find these cupcake sizes quite charming, especially this teeny half-sized one. At the end of the night, a cake is a cake, and like other traditional Quiteño pastries, they're tasty in a simple, understated way that hides all the work it took to get here. Well, that's all for tonight. I have term papers to get back to, so good night, and I'll see you all in the next video.